This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Health Advocacy Network. MHAN advocates for a consumer, family-driven mental health system of care that provides an array of service choices that are timely, responsive, and effective. Our vision is for every North Dakotan to have access to the right service, whether it be preventative, treatment, or recovery, at the right time, when the service is needed, and at the right place, as near his or her home as possible. To learn more about MHAN, our advocacy efforts, and literature about the North Dakota mental health system, visit our website at www.mhan.org. Again, our website is www.mhan.org.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the MHAN podcast. With me today as a co-host, Carlotta McCleary. How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I cannot wait for our topic today. Again, you know, the system itself is kind of complicated, especially when it is involved with justice reform, specifically juvenile justice reform. And I think when people hear that on you know, either in a newspaper or they hear it on the news or they read about it somewhere, they're like, okay, that sounds great. I have no idea what that means, which I am so blessed that we have our guest today helping us out, but very blessed to have you as a co-host today.
Well, I'm glad to join, and I'm really excited to have Kringlie here today. She works in our juvenile courts and has really been a great help, I think, to our organization and understanding a little bit more about this juvenile justice reform. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. I'm happy to join you both.
Great. Could you kind of introduce yourself for the audience and tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So as Carlotta said, my name's Karen Kringlie. I'm the director of juvenile court for Unit 2, which encompasses the southeastern corner of the state. So my office is in Fargo, but we cover Jamestown, Valley City, Wahpeton, all of the 17 counties of southeastern North Dakota. So both the East Central Judicial District and the Southeast Judicial District. So my role is to really guide policy and practice when it comes to kids who interact with the juvenile justice system. And so that includes both kids who are delinquent. You know, that's what most people think of when they think of juvenile court is kids who have committed law violations. But we also cover things such as guardianships of minor children and children who are in need of protection. Formerly, we would refer to as children who are abused or neglected. And we interact in some other ways around child issues, anywhere that children interact with the court system. And we're a subset of the district court.
Perfect. All right. So I like to start from the start, sort of a big 5,000 foot view. And we all know what a court system is. But generally speaking, what's the purpose of having a juvenile court or a juvenile justice system? And under like sort of these optimal circumstances, what's the end goal of having it specific to juvenile?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's so hard for the general public to understand, because one of the key components of juvenile court is that we're closed to the public. So when you're closed to the public, people really don't know what you do unless you happen to interact with us either in a role as a parent, a child, a victim of a case, a practitioner. So I think in general, the public just sees a couple of our most serious scenarios that play out in the media. And they think that's what we do every single day. And those are actually outliers, you know, cases that are so extreme that they're transferred to adult court, for example. So and you can stop me if it gets to be too much, but prior to 1899 in the United States, kids were treated just like adult offenders. And so at common law, kids were treated just like adults. They could receive all of the adult sorts of punishments, like they could be in jail with adults. They could, you know, receive capital punishment. They could be, you know, any of those adult punishments. And what started in Illinois, in Chicago, was the Humane Society, which is interested in the protection of animals, was concerned about the treatment of children in adult facilities. You know, that like a 12-year-old could steal something at the grocery store and be in an adult jail and be vulnerable to adults. So that started the reform effort in Cook County, Illinois, and they formed the first juvenile court there. And then by about 1945, every state in the United States followed suit and created their own juvenile court system. North Dakota was one of the early followers. In fact, we started with juvenile court in 1911. And the primary purpose was really to protect children to create a separate system where they are not treated as adults. They were seen as, different, which is great. And I think, we removed from them from the adult system, but they also lost a lot of the protections. So they didn't have rights like right to an attorney, many of the safeguards like confronting witnesses and all of those different safeguards that we have as adults in the system. And the system really operated under a Latin phrase, parens patriae, like the court as a parent, like the court would step in as a giant dad, looking out for a child, which is great if you have a great dad, and not so great if you don't have a great dad. So there were a lot of inequities that really led to the reform system. And that's kind of, here we are today, many, many years later, having gone through many different eras. In the 60s, that parens patriae era really ended, where we knew that kids needed rights, needed to have attorneys. And then in the 80s and 90s, because of what was seen as an increase in juvenile crime, then it became very punitive. And a lot of kids were sent to boot camps and locked facilities. And there was really kind of an overuse of punitive measures. And now we're in the reform area, where we've got a lot of brain science about adolescent brain development. And we're trying to really do what makes the most sense and is the most cost effective for kids. And so it's an exciting time to be a practitioner, but there's a lot of changes, and change makes people nervous. So you do have to kind of hang on tight and try to roll with the punches as we're reforming the system.
So speaking of those changes, a lot obviously is going on with the juvenile justice reform right now here in North Dakota. I think we could benefit a little bit from a little bit of a summary on what the juvenile justice system was like just prior to the legislative session. And then we can go on to what's happening now.
Sure. Well, when I started practicing in the late 90s, we were still practicing under this 1965 code, the Uniform Juvenile Court Act, and it was largely unchanged for 50 years. So that was right up until the law changed last year. So we were practicing with a 50-year-old code. And it was generally kind of a parens patriae, the court as a parent system. And it was very general. It didn't provide a lot of guidance when it came to what we did with kids on probation. So a lot of that was kind of off the books. And there was really a lacking in transparency, I thought. In our system, we did create our own policy guidelines, but when the Council of State Governments came in, they saw that a lot of what we needed to do needed to be amped up into the statute so that it was clear for parents and kids who interacted with us that it was directly there in the law books. You could see it if you were a family or a lawyer right out of law school, you saw what we were doing. But primarily what we did in North Dakota, through the 80s and 90s, we were a restorative justice system, which that is still our primary mission, is to restore justice in cases and look at the community, look at the victim, and look at the offender and try to gain skills. But a lot of it was pretty subjective. It really depended on who you were appearing in front of, which judge or which court officer. And so I think there's a lot of geographic inequities. And I think the reform attempted to really place the whole state under better practice, which was one goal. And I think we are really getting there. For sure.
One of those reactive, proactive debates that we have in the legislature on a regular basis. I assume. Over the last couple of years, and actually maybe before the legislative session, what were some of the problems or the gaps that people were noticing in the system that maybe spurred some of these changes?
I think one of the things that obviously we've talked about for a long time is the level of service you can get depending on where you live in the state. So it just, you could be 90 miles away from a counselor, or you could live in the same city as a therapist. And so for many families, they maybe looked at driving many miles. Obviously, the pandemic taught us how to Zoom, and that was something that has helped. But it really depended on the city you were in, whether there was a community service program, whether there were substance abuse, classes. For most of the state, really the juvenile court officer, and there are 35 of us in the state, we might be your only access to service. So we were the ones who got in our car and drove out to that rural city to see a kid who, had maybe committed a theft or a burglary. And we tried to address and bring whatever service that was, which is okay, But I think we'd really like to see, and we don't have it yet, but a great system that has evidence-based services available throughout the state in a really easy fashion, where there isn't a long waiting list. You don't have to drive many, many, many miles to get it. And so I think we've done, all of the court officers in the state are committed to working with kids, and we do the best we can. But if you have a really highly complex case and that youth lives 120 miles from your nearest major city, they can't be seen as often. They can't, have access during a crisis. And so I think court officers tried to fill that gap, but we need, that was something that definitely was part of what brought about the reform effort. That and the fact that our code was so old, it was just old language. It reflected the 60s, and life isn't like it was in the 60s. So we needed updated definitions, updated language, clear definitions about who was responsible for what. So that played a part too. So the service gap, I think, and then just updating language. And we were also seeing, too many kids in residential facilities that maybe didn't need to be there and could be treated in the community. So that, I think, that also raised that flag that we needed to look at what we were providing.
Karen, that brings me to question too a little bit about children with mental health issues. Did they end up getting a little bit overrepresented in juvenile justice? As you said, that was the only service provider in those communities. So did we see anything like that happening for children with mental health needs?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think that's not uncommon across the United States. I don't know the exact percentage for North Dakota, but I think most national studies say that, upwards of 60 to 70% of youth that are in detention facilities, juvenile detention facilities, have at least one diagnosable, mental health disorder. And I know, in our system on probation, we do mental health screens, and we do see most, many kids have at least one mental health disorder that they're seeking to address. And when the only service you can access in your town might be through the juvenile justice system, parents might reach out and call the police looking for a citation or an arrest as a method to get some of the services we have. So that created a problem. You shouldn't have to seek to have your child arrested to get a great service. So, I mean, that was a large focus too, was we should be able to reach out for help and not have the only answer be, dial 911 and have your kid ticketed or cited, referred. So we're trying to fix that system.
Outside of kind of the overview on what the sort of legislative changes had from the last session, what were some of the big ones that you're just sort of like, I mean, as a top three or top four, like what were the ones you're like, whoa, there was a lot here. These were incredible. Didn't expect this. Like, do you have a kind of a sense of why or what those big changes would be?
I have a top 40 list, but we won't do it today. We'll just do top 3 or 4. No, I mean, I'm super excited about it, obviously, but I'm kind of a juvenile justice weirdo. But for me, what's big is that we decided, the drafting group and the legislature agreed that every child charged with a delinquency should have an attorney. And this is where fireworks, I don't know what sound effects you have, but it's big. I mean, we're already seeing a difference. I think we'll continue to see a difference. One of the things we know about kids is that when they feel like they're treated fairly, we have better outcomes. So when you have kids come into a system and their parents waive their right to counsel and they don't feel like they're heard, and their parents might say, I can't take off work another day, just say you did it, just, or for the parents, they might not be indigent, but yet to pay that retainer to hire a private attorney is kind of daunting. They might say, I know you're charged with a felony and maybe it should be a misdemeanor. They're non-law trained, making decisions kind of based on their work schedule. Also, we know in juvenile offenses, many times parents are the victims because a lot of juvenile crime occurs in the home, right? That's where kids live, is in their home. So when they have behaviors, it can be a sibling or a parent that is a victim. So to actually have the victim make the decision to waive your right to counsel, it's a conflict. And so for those reasons, I think the legislature saw the wisdom in really deciding that every youth should have an attorney. And I think there was a fear that we would see more trials and more conflictual, but that's not what we have seen so far. And we're over a year into the process. I think we're seeing better outcomes. Obviously, we still have cases go to full trial, and we should. That's what the court is there to do, is to resolve disputes, where there's differences of opinion about evidence and what took place. But I think kids are feeling like they're being heard. Those attorneys are also able to advocate for their needs. And I think we're really going to see great outcomes out of that. In my top 3, just to go on, the court system had put in a rule about competency a few years back, but we put that now into statute. So many times when we have kids who are arrested for offenses in the court system, we might wonder if they really can have that mental intent to commit a crime. For an adult, you have to prove that mens rea, that ability, that wrongful thought. And for some kids, 10, 11, 12 years old, do they really, for some of them, if they have developmental disabilities that have yet to be diagnosed, was there really an intent to harm someone or to break into a house? So now we have a system in place in the statute and the rule, which allows for a competency evaluation to take a look at what's going on. Is this youth actually able and should be fairly treated in the delinquency system, or is this a child in need of services and protection? Is this a vulnerable kid? And so I think that we've really been using that part of the statute quite a bit. We also added into the detention statute that if we have a youth in detention who's exhibiting serious and persistent mental illness, that we can ask for an assessment to be done within 48 hours. More fireworks, right? Big. Because we know that being in locked, secure detention is harmful for kids. It's harmful for all kids, but if you have a mental health disorder, it's particularly harmful and increases suicide rates. So knowing that it actually says in the statute, detention staff, juvenile court staff, their attorneys, we can all raise that issue to the court and they can order that assessment to be done within 48 hours. And so our human service centers are doing those assessments. They're being filed with the court, and that gives the court the right information to make the right decisions. Another part, you'll have to stop me, but another part was we've always been doing the MHAN-2, which is a mental health screen. We've been doing that for many, many years. The statute requires that when a youth is detained, that we file that with the court right away. So now it's in front of the judge's eyes, the attorney's eyes, the parent's eyes. It's much more transparent to the system that we might have a youth who's scoring with some elevated needs that we need to be evaluated. So that's huge. We've been doing a validated risk assessment tool on youth with delinquencies for over 20 years. It's a great tool, but the statute had nothing in there about it, right? The statute was old from the 60s. Now the new statute says you have to file with the court your assessment tool prior to the court reaching its decision. So in adult language, you'd call that a pre-sentence investigation. For us, we call it a predisposition investigation. And we do that assessment, and it assesses the youth throughout all these different domains of their life and gives the court information about what is the area of their life that's really driving that criminal behavior that needs to be addressed. So that also is filed with the court, filed with the attorneys. So sometimes you might see a theft and think, well, we need to address, this taking behavior, but actually it's substance abuse driven, right? So instead we need to focus on substance use, or it might be mental health disorder, right? So this way, they're getting that assessment before making the decision. Prior to the law change, the court was making a decision on outcome, and then we did the assessment afterwards. Didn't make sense, right? So anyway, it's really putting the analysis ahead of the decision. So that makes great sense. I think too, just adding a lot of more language about the use of incentives and sanctions. We know a lot more about what drives human behavior, that we need to have 4 times as many incentives as sanctions, which is true for all of us, right? So, Carlotta's doing a great job today, and we should recognize that. Patrick's, you need to continue to praise youth because that's what they're going to respond to, that positive environment. And that it's right in the statute that court officers will use graduated sanctions and incentives as they address behavior. So we shouldn't just be pulling them back into the court for every minor little thing. We should be able to handle that as we work with behavior in a positive way. So like I said, I could rattle on for a long time, but for sure the attorney thing, huge.
Big.
Oh, and then I misspoke too. Obviously, we did a big thing in North Dakota when we carved away the unruly behaviors out of the criminal behaviors. So we took what we called unruly child, which was like running away, disobedience of a parent, truancy, and then this use and possession of tobacco under 14. Those are all what we called status offenses. And we decriminalized them. I kind of use that word and hesitate a little bit because we're not in a criminal system in the juvenile court, but we took those, which are can be normative adolescent behavior, and we now created a new system, which we call child in need of services. And those referrals don't come to the court anymore. This is started in August. They go to the human service zone where they're assessed for services and connected with services. And if there's a youth that's super chronic and the parent isn't following through, there is a mechanism where they can do a child in need of protection court action. But so many times we saw overrepresentation of girls, for example, in like running away. And those, they can be running away because of child abuse and neglect. They can be running away because of human trafficking concerns. They can be running away because of unaddressed mental health concerns. And prior to the law change, we were having those kids in our same lobbies with kids who were committing crime, thefts, burglaries, robberies, those types of things. And they were really kind of mixed. And so we've separated those populations. I believe we're only the fourth state in the nation to have done this. And I think as we watch the numbers, in the coming years, the data, we will have done a great work with, especially with gendered, and then with families, just kind of putting the power back with families to try to connect to services without coming into the court system, right? And having that kind of feeling of a mark. And also allowing our court officers to really focus on the highest risk kids, the kids who pose the most danger to public safety. Let's focus, those 35 people, right, on these very high risk kids, and allow the lower level cases to be handled by the communities. So those are the big ones.
I often think about the children in need of services, labeling it as such instead of unruly. It really does change the whole. I mean, it's a paradigm shift in how we look at kids, rather than being unruly and that's a justice issue, to really take a look at these are kids that have some unmet needs. And I think it'll change the way we look at these kids from everybody.
Yep. I have to say, when the Commission on Juvenile Justice was working on the bill draft, there was a small group of us that we thought it should be families in need of services, fins instead of chins, but we lost. Because I think it's a more complicated question. It typically is a more complicated question than just the one person.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you have, the idea of community-based services in all sort of entities, except for this. Right. You're like this prior to, it's like you're relying on this group of individuals who know the family, who know the children, to kind of help lift up and sort of be there as a support system, because it's what they know. It's what they're more comfortable with. And the inflexibility prior to this change didn't allow any of that. And of course, this has this aha moment. You would say the fireworks. I have this like, duh. Like that, of course, like that moment where I think a lot of people who listen to this or who didn't know about any of the language changes and the barriers there would say, well, of course, we want everybody who understands this child or this family a lot better than a rigid court system that just goes by a book that has words that have no meaning since 1964. That doesn't, I don't think it means anything.
Yeah. And I think there's, some of the struggles that we've seen is that we have been seen out in our communities as a resource for children. So that's good. That's good that juvenile court officers were seen as a resource for children and families. So I think there's a little pullback, like you're taking us away, like there's a little fear factor. But yet I think it also will cause a pump up of, like the local private providers, the human service centers, like they'll be filling the gap, because instead the juvenile justice system will focus on the core delinquent youth that are causing some public safety concerns and really need our specialized focus. I think when we were putting only truant kids on probation, it tended to look to the kid like my truancy is my fault. which in many cases there was more family dynamic, or even like the relationship the kid had with the school. And so there was more to it than just saying, well, you have a curfew and you have to be home at night and you have to report to this person once a week. This is more complicated. We have many truancy kids are actually experiencing some early symptoms of mental health disorders that need to be addressed, like depression or anxiety. And so when you take our core staff, which we have great staff, but we come from a criminal justice background or a law trained background. And really, if you're looking at these early symptoms of depression or anxiety, shouldn't those be seen by mental health providers? Right up front. You shouldn't have to go through the gates of the criminal justice system to then see your mental health provider. So,
absolutely. I think that, in that very instance, if we can, again, knowing what the cause is of the behavior helps you respond in a more appropriate manner to what needs to be done. Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of those, unruly youth too, I think we saw about half of them had some open child protection cases, which means there was also abuse and neglect somewhere in the family dynamic. And so those are best addressed by social workers and trained, human service providers. I think it's kind of like, going to the podiatrist and saying, I have a heart problem. We're great podiatrists over here at juvenile court, but you need to go to the right people from the get-go. So I think, just like we see it in the when you go to the clinic or the hospital, there needs to be that initial triage and getting you to the right place, right department in the system. And instead we were starting with a podiatrist, we need to have more of a triage. And that's really the system we're trying to build. It's not perfect yet. We're really building the plane while we're flying it. And that's the uncomfortable thing for a lot of us. A lot of us in the system is that not knowing, is that service going to be there? Is that service going to be there as much for Carrington as it is for Ellendale, as it is for Hart? All of these places across the state. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think, again, they're very exciting changes. I know in the children's mental health field, I'm over the moon excited with the fact that kids might really be children in need of services, might be getting the mental health care that they need, and finally directed that direction. And we can have everybody in the community, schools, parents, everybody in the community realize that, these mental health needs need to get seen. So I am very excited.
Me too.
So the biggest successes and small victories that have surprised you with this process, has there been anything that's kind of been surprising and kind of fun?
I think this whole change has caused us to talk a lot more. And I think that's been really helpful. I think we've been having great discussions between the schools and law enforcement and the mental health providers and the zones. And I think we're learning a lot about each other's systems. We're having to understand each other's acronyms and figure things out. And I think in the past we did operate in silos. And now that we're talking together, are we finding problems? Yep, we are. But isn't it better to find the problem than ignore it and not know where it is? So, as bumpy as sometimes this year has been, I think for me, the surprise has been how much we've learned from each other about what we do well and where our strengths are and where families' needs can best be met. There shouldn't be like a long delay, and we know time is of the essence, especially for children who grow and change so much. When you think from 10 to 11 to these different ages, and I think that has been a surprise for me, how well we've all figured out that we all have a passion for kids and families. It's just having to work together within our systems to make it work. So I think the collaboration it's forced upon us has been a bonus.
Well, I also think it's one of those things where, over communication is absolutely key in everything, right? Yeah. And I think that forced collaboration, I think, really allows, like you said, everybody's passion to kind of come forward. And then at the end of the day, if you know that kids and families are going to be like, that's why you're in this, that's why you're doing it, why you're trying to help, that one banner, if the government gets a lot of criticism for not working well. And what this sort of showcases is that this is what it can do when it has a an aligned purpose. And if you're all on the same page for that, a lot of the sticky sort of details, I think, work their way out a lot quicker than they normally would in a very mundane sort of like rigid system. I think that's the piece about that.
I agree for sure. I'll share my like little Ted Lasso moment in hopes that you don't laugh at me, but I read about professional reading, all the system all the time, but I have created a little sign above my door that I don't think many people see, but it's like the juvenile justice system should be rare, fair, and beneficial. And so those are my three key things I think about. You shouldn't need to interact with us, but if you do, we're going to be fair about how we handle it. So, if your child has developmental disabilities, should they be held, should they have the same outcome as a 17-year-old who fully intended to break into your house? And, we need to be fair. That is core to what the court does, and need to be beneficial. We want to have good outcomes. So why would we keep doing something that's not working? Nobody goes to work thinking, I'm going to spend hours and hours of time for something that isn't working. So I'm excited about the data. I think, as we work our way through a few more years, we'll see, benefits. Like I said, it's bumpy right now because we're seeing gaps, but I sometimes have to remind myself and remind my staff that where we see gaps, we're seeing them now. Now we can address it. Until you see it, you can't fix it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about, again, that forcing of a system to change, like in mental health. We all know that the mental health system was in crisis, and they're working really hard to try and get that put back together. But in the meantime, there are probably going to be gaps for children with mental health needs, and we're going to see some of those gaps. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think, the parents and the kids have to face those gaps. And I think it's great that the rest of the system kind of takes off the blindfold, so to speak, and takes a look at what's really going on here. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes it's hard for my staff over time because we're closed to the public. There isn't a news story about us that, sometimes I think the general public has this perception that, oh, this kid got a slap on the wrist. And if we had a nickel for every time we heard that expression. The funny thing about the juvenile justice system is, unlike the adult system, we're not tasked with punishing kids. We're tasked with actually treating and rehabilitating, which is far harder, right? We're actually tasked with changing behavior. And so when we hear slap on the wrist, we're like, actually, we're meeting with this kid every week. We're doing skills coaching. We're practicing. We're helping them see themselves in a different light. We're connecting them with services. We're, trying to keep them sober. It's hard work. It's actually harder than sending them to a residential facility far away.
Absolutely.
And we're so much cheaper, not to brag, but we're way cheaper than a residential facility. And so I think part of the cost benefits that you're going to see is that when we only have the right kids going to the residential facilities, we're going to save some money that hopefully can come back to the communities in services. When I think, just by comparison, locked secure detention can be roughly in that $400 a night. We use GPS bracelets for some kids who can be out of detention but need to have closer supervision. Those are like about $4 a day. That's a big difference. My staff, when we do probation, I think they've estimated it can cost about $11 a day. We're worth it. We're passionate about coaching kids. We're using evidence-based skill building workbooks like Carry Guides and Change Company journals. And we're using our assessment to kind of focus in on which domain of their life they need some added skills. And then we're seeing them and working on it. And the fact that we're able to kind of make sure those super low risk kids are seen with community services, that allows us to focus on kids who really need that added emphasis and time. So I think my staff, sometimes they're like, wow, every kid I see now is really complicated. And I'm like, yep, because we're doing the right thing, right? The easy kids, can see some of the community services and get addressed there. The kids we're seeing are complicated kids, and they require a lot of case management and a passion for behavior change models, and to know the adolescent brain is going to keep growing and changing, and a lot of that pushing against the rules is so normative. 90% of kids will outgrow delinquent behavior even if we do nothing.
Mm.
So, I mean, we're really just trying to build up those skills because we don't want victims. Obviously, we don't want victims in the community, and there needs to be a response, but it needs to be the right response, the right dose. So I think we're aligning these things. We're getting it figured out.
Well, and one of the best parts about that is too, and yeah, there's a cost benefit to, doing what you're doing, but there's a life benefit for every individual that comes through your shoulders, right? So you're supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, the next generation of CEOs, the next generation of individuals who, everybody's got something that they got away with. Everybody's got, everybody. You and me and everybody else, and everybody else who says no is a liar.
I think they say that 1 out of 4 American males has done something in their life that could be deemed a felony.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what you're doing is you're not throwing away their potential, and you're doing it in a more fair way. And again, we're worried about workforce. What is this? How are you not preparing this next generation to stay in the state that supported them, that they want to give back? The next generation of philanthropists, who gave them a chance? Is it the state? Is it the entities within their own community that they do that? Yeah. Who are your next leaders? Who are your next pastors? Who are your next business? I mean, it is all right there in your fingertips. So to say that this is not well worth the investment to just throw away something is absolutely, dare I say, asinine. And that your hard work, and that this sort of juvenile justice as it stands, and the reforms that are made are going to do just that.
Can I share one little story?
Please.
So we did a statewide training last year on growth-focused case management for probation. And one of the things we do now in my offices and across the state is, after we have a youth and family in to talk about an offense, and they've admitted, we've come to some conclusion about what we're going to do, we actually kind of close the file and ask the youth what they're interested in being. Like, what's their career interest? And some they don't know, but many of them have, I'm interested in being a welder, or I'm interested in running my own store, or I'd like to be a school teacher. So out on our wall in our lobbies now, we post their career interests. They put it on a tag with like a chalk marker. And part of probation is to work towards those growth-focused goals. So it's not just, they need to address the crime, right? So they need to pay their restitution or do their community service, go to school, be law-abiding, all of those traditional type probation things. But part of the job is also, hey, she wants to be a barista. Does anybody know anybody who's a barista? Could we get her to do a job shadow? What does it take? Well, is this type of behavior, like, let's say, theft or substance use, will that get you to your goal of being a barista? No. So we have the youth pick their goal, and they work towards it. And sometimes they change their mind. So I love it when they come back to the office and say, I wanted to be a barista, but now I'm thinking about teaching school, and I'd like to be a music teacher. So they change their goal out on the wall. When they finish probation, they come and take their goal card and put a sticker up on the wall. And I just think it's such a mind shift, right? So that they're not coming and checking in like, I'm the theft kid here to see my probation officer. Instead, it's I'm the future store owner, and I'm trying to. So even that shift in mindset, completely worth it. And I think staff view the kids differently. Even their parents, I think, view them differently. Like, wow, I didn't know he was interested in welding. Maybe we could get him on a tour down at the university. You start thinking about how to connect these kids to their future and getting that future thought. So anyway, I would ramble on. So cut me off. But
we let you. I mean, that's the other thing that that's really great. And again, it's because just a final thought as we wrap up here is that, seeing the numbers, and Karen, you kind of mentioned that you'll be watching these numbers very carefully, and your sort of brain is like, you're going to see an incredible reduction in X, Y, and Z. I think that has great benefits for other portions of the government and other agencies to see that, oh, okay, if we just look at it this way, we just look at community-based this way, if we invest here, maybe some of the other systematic, sort of big things that are hard to do could maybe open up and soften a little bit for the rigidness because of what your success is going to be. And it's going to be really, really fun to watch. And that's going to be great. From all of us here at the MHAN podcast, and Carlotta and myself, too, thank you so much for your perspective. Thanks so much for your hard work. Thanks so much for not only sharing with us some of the state of a very complicated and then very quiet issue. If you don't know about it, you don't know about it, and to allow us a peek behind the curtain to really feel this movement of positive ability to maybe take into account mental health for the first time and not be so rigid in things is such a wonderful gift that you've given us and the listeners here. How do people get a hold of you if they have any additional questions, or is there any resources that you would lead them to as they have any questions about not only justice reform or anything on your particular office?
The North Dakota Supreme Court has a really nice website, and there's a juvenile court portion of the website. So that's ndcourts.gov. And you can see maps. There's actually a data dashboard now that I think will be even more developed as we go on, but you can see last year's statistics and drill down if you're interested in something specific. You can reach me at the Cass County Annex here in Fargo, 701-451-6980. And I think my email is on the North Dakota Courts webpage, but you could reach out to any of the juvenile court offices in the state if you have questions about the services we provide and the way we connect with kids and families.
We'll drop all of those notes in the show notes and all those links in the show notes as well. Karen, thanks so much for being a guest here today. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks, listeners, for joining us on the MHAN podcast.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Health Advocacy Network. MHAN advocates for a consumer, family-driven mental health system of care that provides an array of service choices that are timely, responsive, and effective. Our vision is for every North Dakotan to have access to the right service, whether it be preventative, treatment, or recovery, at the right time, when the service is needed, and at the right place, as near his or her home as possible. To learn more about MHAN, our advocacy efforts, and literature about the North Dakota mental health system, visit our website at www.mhan.org. Again, our website is www.mhan.org.